Welcome to Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
I'm your host, Madeline.
And I'm your co-host, Kenna.
Okay, Kenna, today I wanted to start out by asking, have you ever worked food service?
Yes, I have. Not for very long, though. When I was 14, I started my job, my career, if you will.
Your career, yes.
I started my career at 14. It reads like a Dickens novel. Working at the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park in Canyon City, Colorado, where I was outside making popcorn and every once in a while making funnel cakes and cotton candy. It was very fucking hot in the summertime outside. So I have worked food service when I was very young. Fast forward many years later when I lived in Portland, very briefly did some, I don't know if you could call it waitressing or serving, at the Pied Cow Coffee House.
I think I have lots of friends when they moved to Portland, they did a bikini barista thing.
It's not like that. It's like a cool old, like, kind of gothic-y, like, Victorian house.
Cool.
And they just serve, like, coffee and pastries and do hookah. So it's, like, very charming. It's, like, very old Portland. But I didn't last very long at that because I wasn't very good, and I needed extra money to be able to sell vintage clothing. So I would like make some tips from the night before, go out, buy some stuff to resell, make a little bit more money. So I haven't worked it very long because, one, I am very bad at it. And two, it was like too physically demanding.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really worked food service either, except when I was also 14. I did a job where I carried one of those big concession things around my neck, and I walked up and down the stairs at the stadium in my town selling,
cute.
Yeah, like I just ice cream and popcorn.
Baby Madeline.
Well, I'm very small for my age, so a lot of the people in the audience were very concerned. I was literally like 10 years old, and they thought that there was like child labor happening, and they kept reporting me to my boss, like, this child is too young to be laboring, and I was trying to carry the big heavy thing.
Aww.
And everybody spoke Spanish, so I was trying to speak Spanish, but I was getting the slang for ice cream wrong. Like, I was doing the Spain version of ice cream, not the Mexico version, and most of the people were Mexican American, like, in my town. So it was a whole nightmare, and that only lasted like a month maybe. But aside from that, yeah, when I got my work permit at 14 and was thinking about what types of jobs I wanted to do, I remember actually thinking that food service seemed really, really stressful and hard. And like, I probably would not be very good at it either. So we have that in common.
Yeah, I really salute people who are good at service industry stuff. Like, my sister is like A+, like server, bartender, everything like that. She really excels. And I am just so in awe of her for doing that. And I can't, but like me, it's like, it just doesn't quite click.
Yeah, I don't feel like I would be good at it because specifically my memory's not great and I'm really not very coordinated.
Yeah, I think, but I'm worked retail for years, which is like very, like in a way, very similar. Except for like, I feel like in like food service and like, people always want what you have. They're there to get the food. Whereas
yes.
In retail, they are not there always to buy your stuff.
Right. I think like if I imagine myself working food service, it was like a comedy of errors, right? Where like I set everything down wrong in front of everyone at the table, and then like somehow I drop all the food on someone's head, and then I break all the glasses, and the whole restaurant does that condescending thing they do when someone breaks a glass where they clap, and then I just like have spaghetti on my face or something.
Yeah, mine was, the brief time I was like just getting people drinks and stuff, my memory was bad, and I kept going over to the table too often because I was like...
You were too attentive.
I was like annoying because I was so used to working retail.
Where you need to constantly be servicing people.
Yes.
No, that makes sense. I actually ended up working more in retail myself. And then eventually, like, office grunt work, like data entry, stuff like that. And,
Same.
Yeah, and then in retail, you know, I worked at Hot Topic in our local mall when I was 15 in the year 2002. And then mostly I just worked in 1-hour photo labs.
Oh, so nice. I have worked in vintage stores forever.
Yeah.
For a long time.
The photo lab thing was cool, though, because I had actually applied to work at Target. And this was back in the days where you still had paper applications and you would like put them down on a stack with all the other applications. And the woman who ran the photo lab saw me and she was like, I need someone like that. She seems really outgoing because she had kind of created this like goth angry clique at the photo lab and nobody was like very customer service oriented. So she went and stole my application and then called me that night and was like, hey, I saw you applied at Target. I got a better job for you. And
wow.
Yeah, she was cool. Her name was Alice. She lived in a trailer park. She had 2 kids. Her boyfriend was in prison. And the thing I liked about Alice is that she generally understood that capitalism was fucked, so fuck this job anyway, you know?
Cool.
So she put together this, motley crew of, cynical, jaded, anti-capitalist kind of throwaways, and she taught me pretty early on that the cool thing about working at the photo lab is that, sure, it's customer service, and you have to deal with these assholes, but these assholes don't know how developing pictures actually works. So you can make up whatever you want to tell them on the spot, and they have no way of fighting you about it. So if you just didn't want to work, she'd be like, put up the machine broken sign and go home. None of us got paid enough by corporate to really care, and she knew that, and she was an icon, truly.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so all of this is to say that when it comes to food service, I have not a single day of experience, unless you count me walking up and down the steps of the stadium. But I do seem to remember these things about my friends who worked food service. Number 1, they were always working, long shifts, back to back, open to close, just constant work. Mm-hmm. Number 2, if they were servers, they were always getting treated like absolute shit by the customers.
Yes.
Number 3, if they worked in the kitchen, they were always getting treated like absolute shit by the owners.
Oof.
Number 4, if they were pretty girls, they were getting sexually harassed 24/7. Number 5, if they were able to monetize that harassment, they could make some pretty good money by flirting with the manager and flirting with the customers. Number 6, if they were upset by the harassment, they were usually fired pretty quickly for some bullshit reason like insubordination. Number 7, most of the time they had extra cash on hand to buy cigarettes and booze, but they didn't actually make enough money for their overall quality of life to be that much different than mine. And number 8, the holy grail was getting to be a server at a really high-end restaurant where you could make good tips, like $200 to $300 per shift on top of your hourly pay. But that was really rare and usually only an option for very conventionally attractive, 20-something girls. Mm-hmm. So, I grew up in California, and here everyone makes the same minimum wage regardless of tipping. But there are these weird workarounds, especially retail, maybe you've encountered, where you can do things like draw against commission, where you technically make minimum wage, but you have to sell commission to earn your minimum wage.
That's so fucked. I haven't worked in that retail situation, but I know people who have, and it's absolutely fucked.
Yeah, but even with that, nobody in California would be making below minimum wage legally here. People do because they're being exploited, but it's illegal. So yeah, I grew up thinking you tip the servers, you're 20% or whatever because the job is extra fucking shitty and hard. Imagine my surprise to learn as an adult, though, that in some states in the United States, you actually are tipping so that your server can make minimum wage.
I believe that's how Colorado was like.
Yeah, in many states, there are special rules in place for servers that allow them to be paid below minimum wage by their employers. It's called a sub-minimum wage. And there's the expectation that their tips from the customers will pay the rest, which means today we must be talking about tipping culture.
Ooh.
Yeah, so first off, I want to thank our Patreon subscriber, Holly Williams, for recommending this topic for today's episode.
Ooh.
Now, Kenna, what is the lowest amount of money you think someone can be paid in the form of an hourly wage to work in the United States? Do you know?
Well, if you're going to the tipping thing, I don't know, but I feel like when I was younger and I saw other people's pay stubs who worked in food service who had tipping, it would be $4 an hour.
Yeah, it varies in state to state, but it's $2.13.
Whoa, what the fuck?
Yeah. In 16 states across the U.S., the legal functional minimum wage for anyone working in an industry where they are expected to earn tips, whether they actually earn tips or not, is just $2.13 per hour, which means if they earn no tips in a shift, their daily pay rate for an 8-hour shift is $17.04.
No.
Yeah, and those states are Alabama, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Nebraska, North Carolina, Puerto Rico, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Virginia, and Wyoming. And in many other states, the sub-minimum wage for tipped industries is higher, but not by much. This could have been the Colorado thing with the $4 an hour, because we see wages like...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I can't say for certain because old and memory bad.
The memory thing we have, yes.
But I do know of people who have made the sub-minimum wage, because I would be like, oh, well, this is my minimum wage rate.
Right.
And other people will be like, well, let me tell you something.
Yeah, some of them are like $2.63, $2.83, $3.35, $3.26. And that kind of happens all across the country. In fact, only 8 states in the U.S. mandate the same hourly minimum wage for tipped positions as other jobs. Yeah.
I hate it here.
This might be a case of correlation and not causation, but I also thought it was interesting to note that the list of states operating off of the $2.13 minimum wage correlates almost perfectly with maps of high poverty in the U.S. The only states on that list without greater than average poverty levels were Virginia, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Utah. So 75% of the states where you pay service workers just $2.13 per hour, shockingly, are states with high poverty. And experts do say that, yes, amongst other things, raising wages is a key way to fight poverty. And in these 16 states, a tipped worker is most frequently defined as anyone who earns either $20 or $30 a month in tips. And many states actually have no legal law specifying how much they have to earn in tips per month at all. So with a low end range of $17.04 per day as legal pay for service workers here in the U.S., even in states with the high-end minimum designation of tips required to qualify for that low $2.13 hourly pay, $30 minimum monthly tips, that means you could still theoretically go to work, complete a full month of 8-hour shifts, only to earn $98.16, or just $3.06 per hour, which is still far below the federal hourly minimum wage of $7.25.
Oh my God.
Which itself has not been raised since 2009, since which time it has lost 21% of its value, marking the longest period in U.S. history without an increase in the federal minimum wage, even at that $7 amount.
Oh my God. I literally didn't know it was that low.
I know. So if our federal minimum wage at $7.25 is outdated and far too low for far too long, how on earth are we still okay with servers earning just $2.13 per hour by contrast? And how exactly did this whole practice of tipping in the U.S. get started?
Pray tell.
So first I want to talk about how tipping works in other places in the world. So there are places in Europe where there's a little bit of tipping culture, but it's nowhere near as high or as expected as it is in North America and in the United States in particular. Like in the UK, restaurants will often add a service charge into the bill, meaning you don't need to tip on top of it. But if there is no service charge, 10% is considered generous. And it's not really common to tip like at pubs if you're not ordering food. Instead, you might offer to buy the bartender a drink here and there if you were feeling generous, but that's not necessary either. So in France, restaurants and bars will usually add that service charge into their bill as well. And a tip on top of that is usually not necessary. However, if it's not present, that service charge, you can usually tip around 10 to 15% as well if you'd like for good service. And in Italy, some restaurants will include a cover charge, which doesn't necessarily go directly to the server, or a service charge specifically. Tipping on top of this isn't expected at all, but you might round up the bill. In Spain, tipping isn't really customary either, unless you're at a very high-end restaurant, where you might leave a 10% tip just to show you're classy, but otherwise, you just round up the bill to be polite. Croatia, pretty similar. Scandinavia, pretty similar too. There might be a service charge on the bill, there might not be. Whatever the case, there's no general expectation to leave a tip, but it is customary to just round up that bill. And in Turkey, it's starting to be a little more common in major city and tourist locations to leave a tip, and that would customarily be 10% at restaurants, and then you just round up the bill at bars. And then in Russia, there's also a gratuity expectation for table service of roughly 10%. Now, in the Middle East, tipping culture is more prevalent, but it's still nowhere near the amount we see in the United States. While tips are expected, they're supposed to be given discreetly, and they often range from 10 to 15%, in addition to any service charges on the bill, since those would usually go to the restaurant and not your server directly. In Africa, we also usually see a range of 10 to 15% at restaurants and a rounded up bill at a bar as being customary. And in China and Japan, tipping would actually be considered rude. There's like anecdotal stories of Japanese waiters running after American tourists to return their tips because it's considered a not classy thing to do there. Throughout Southeast Asia, tipping would also be considered pretty odd. And it would only happen at like upscale Western hotels or restaurants that cater to American tourists. There are some exceptions like Thailand and the Philippines where restaurants will typically include a 10% service charge. But if it's missing, yeah, you could throw in 10% if you wanted. And in Australia, tipping isn't expected most places either. In fact, it seems pretty similar to Spain or Croatia. You don't need to tip, but if you're at like a fancy restaurant and you want to play Mr. Moneybags for the night, you could leave 10% to look classy. And South America also appears to have that kind of 10% expectation in most countries for tipping at restaurants. So now, let's kind of bring it back to North America, right? Here in the US, I think we all know it's considered non-negotiable to tip 20% whenever you go out to eat at a restaurant.
Like if you're, 20% is like, also that's how it's easy to round it up in
and
your
do the
brain.
math,
Yeah, because you just take the first number, times it by 2.
Right. So that 20% would be on top of the total bill before taxes, and usually regardless of like the quality of service you received, right? I usually tip between 25 and 30% if I think like, wow, this was really good service, or I'll just tip on the after-tax amount to make the math easier.
I always tip on the after-tax and then do like 20% and then round it up to the next whole number.
Right.
Unless they're being really good, then I'll add extra. Oh my gosh. And I remember like there's been a couple times when I've tipped extra because one time I was at a restaurant in LA and I had just finished Rose Bowl, so I had a bunch of cash in my pocket, and the person who was serving before was like talking to their manager and they were crying because they're like, I just served this table of 7 people and they didn't tip at all. Like, what do I do? Like, blah, blah, blah. And it was like, they were really upset. So I left like an extra, I think I left like $20 to $50 because I had a bunch of money in my pocket. Yeah. Because I just felt really bad.
I feel like that's pretty common actually, because we went out, a few of us, after work one day, and we did like a little work meeting at a bar, but we also ordered food. So there was a server. I don't think you were there actually. It was me and Sarah and somebody else. And the server was having a really bad day. It was like she was forced to work. She thought it was this whole thing. She was so stressed out. She was crying.
I think I was there.
Were you there? And we left her $100 tip on something like a $30 meal because she was having such a bad day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's just something you do here.
Like here and there when you're just like, you hear a story and you're like, damn, like I got a little extra.
Right. Like the 20% is the baseline expectation, and the actual like gratitude for service or whatever would be added on top of that if you felt inclined or could afford it at the moment. And yeah, at a bar, most people I think tip $2 for drinks, but you can usually get away with $1 if it's just like a bartender served you something in a can, right? A beer. And then we also tip for things like valet services, bellhops, taxis, rideshare drivers, food delivery. I actually recently had to poll everybody at the office at work to ask how much I should be tipping for food delivery, because I was like, is it 15? Is it less than a server? What is it? And everyone was like, no, it's not less than a server. That job is so shitty. And I was like, okay, yeah, it's like a server.
And I feel like even if the bill isn't very much, you got to do like, even
at
if
least
it's
$5.
Like even if it's like you're being super lazy and it's a 2-minute drive to your house, like it's got to be at least $5 or $7.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely like kind of the norm here in the US. And from everything I've read, Canada actually operates pretty similar to the US. Servers there often also earn minimum wage, or in some provinces lower, to theoretically balance out their tips, which are expected to be in the 15 to 20% range for a meal as well. However, servers in Quebec earn the lowest hourly rate, with that expectation of tips balancing out to a higher wage. It's like their sub-minimum wage, and that comes in at $9.80 per hour in Canadian dollars, which if you were to convert it in US dollars is, wait for it, $7.87.
So like the minimum wage.
Yeah. That's their low pay.
Wow.
Which is higher than our federal minimum wage, obviously, and over 3 times as high as our lowest server wage of $2.13, which might be a part of why Canada's middle class is now better off than the American middle class, with their wealth raising nearly 20% in the period between the year 2000 and 2014, similar to the UK's actually also, compared to just 0.3% growth for the US middle class in that same time period. Income inequality and poverty in Canada, while still an issue, are not as high as they are here in the US. And according to one article, it's because, quote, governments in Canada and Western Europe take more steps to redistribute income by raising the take-home pay of low and middle class households, which helps address this problem. So also, in North America, we have Mexico. And in Mexico, tipping is it's a little bit expected, not as much dollar-wise, but at a restaurant, a good tip would be 15%, with 10% being acceptable, and often a gratuity will already be included in the bill. And of course, if you go to more touristy places with a lot of American tourists, they expect you to tip like it's the United States, so that would be up to 20. So anyway, the thing that strikes me about all of this is that outside of the US, if tipping happens, it's more like how we traditionally think of a tip, a little extra as an appreciation for good service. But here, we seem to think of it more like actual payment of wages. In short, the customers in the United States are paying the servers instead of the restaurants paying them for their labor. We're footing the business's bill so they don't have to cough it up. And in some of these countries where tipping isn't customary, like Australia, that's because their servers are already being paid a living wage by their bosses. They earn an average of $14.38 per hour, which translates into $11.37 US dollar, far above that $2.13 we have going on here in lots of places. And the national average in the US of $9 per hour, including tips for the entire country. And that also, that's a national average. So that takes into account places like Los Angeles, where our $15 per hour minimum wage applies to every job, including the service industry, and our servers earn tips on top of that. So California in particular has additional protections for servers. Here, it's illegal for restaurant owners and managers to siphon money off of their tips. Starbucks actually recently got busted for stealing tips, and they had to pay baristas $105 million for the theft. But California has more worker protections than lots of U.S. states, and these types of protections and higher pay are certainly not the norm everywhere in the U.S. So how did we get here? To a place where it's now customary for the customer to pick up the restaurant owner's slack and pay their employees for them. So I have now the history of tipping in the U.S.
Wow.
Do you know anything about the history of tipping?
I fucking don't.
Okay, well, it's interesting. I didn't know either. But tipping originated in feudal Europe, most likely in Tudor England around the 16th and 17th century.
Interesting.
Right? And according to the New York Times, by the 17th century, it was expected that overnight guests to private homes would provide sums of money, known as vails, to the host's servants. Soon after, customers began tipping in London coffee houses and other commercial establishments. One frequented by Samuel Johnson had a bowl printed with the words, "To ensure promptitude," TIP, and some speculate that TIP is an acronym for this phrase.
Whoa, galaxy brain moment.
I know.
Or like, my mind is blown.
Tipping began as an aristocratic, that was a hard word for me to pronounce, practice, a sprinkle of change for social inferiors, and it quickly spread among the upper class of Europe. Yet even on its onset, tipping engendered feelings of anxiety and resentment. In the mid-1800s, after leaving the Bell Inn of Gloucester, the Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle complained, "The dirty scrub of a waiter grumbled about his allowance, which I reckoned liberal. I added 6 pence to it, and he produced a bow, which I was near rewarding with a kick." She really hated that server. Wanted to kick him. But the server was like, "This isn't enough. What are you doing?" In the 1700s, Benjamin Franklin visited Paris, and he remarked of the custom, "To overtip is to appear an ass. To undertip is to appear an even greater ass."
Oh, how do we know? How do we know what to do?
By the 1800s in Britain, customers would usually give a coin or two before a meal to ensure good service. So then we fast forward a little, and following the Civil War, Americans began traveling to Europe, and they brought back the practice of tipping to make themselves seem worldly and cultured and traveled. But tipping had another darker, more twisted, and yes, you guessed it, racist appeal in the United States following the war.
Of course.
It's all just racism. Everything we do is because of racism. So it's pretty fucked up. The Civil War in the United States was linked, to the emancipation of all formerly enslaved people here, the vast majority of whom were Black. So as states, especially in the South, scrambled to find ways to enslave Black citizens yet again, just by a different name, often through a variety of Black codes that set up specific and strict laws for how recently freed Black people were able to be employed, and then increased regulations monitoring the movement of Black people with the end goal of ultimately imprisoning them so that they could legally be forced to labor again for free. Tipping culture provided an immediate opportunity for the forced labor exploitation of Black people yet again. So I have a quote here. After emancipation, the restaurant lobby demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, mostly Black women, not pay them anything, and have them live entirely on this new idea that had just come from Europe called a tip. And this is a quote from Saru Jarayamayan, the director of the Food and Labor Research Center at the University of California, Berkeley, and co-founder of the nonprofit advocacy group Restaurant Opportunities Center United. Soon, the railway and restaurant industries were fighting to use tipping as their employees' full wages to exploit their African-American labor force, and they won. According to Politico, one of the most notorious examples comes from the Pullman Rail Company, which hired newly freed African-American men as porters. Rather than paying them a real wage, Pullman provided the Black porters with just a meager pittance, forcing them to rely on tips from their white clientele for most of their pay. The Pullman Company employed mostly Black workers, providing a high-end service experience for travelers of their rail line. George Pullman designed these high-end train carriages and hired Black porters to assist with your baggage, make your bed, entertain your children, and answer the bell whenever you rang, all with a smile. The growing American middle class, who could not afford a servant at home, loved what they perceived to be this luxury experience, and these Southern Black porters were paid mostly in tips. The Pullman Company was a huge proponent of tipping, since it served their financial interests by alleviating the pressure placed on them to pay their Black workers. The company was investigated by the Railroad Commission of California in the early 1900s for their egregious use of tipping in lieu of payment, since it wasn't even normalized in the U.S. by this time. So throughout the 1870s and 1880s, though, there was this growing backlash against tipping. Many Americans felt like it was a shakedown, and they were like, wait, we already paid, now we have to pay twice? And as soon as 1897, the New York Times was reporting that Americans thought tipping was antithetical to American democratic ideals. As Politico explains, by this point, tipping had further entrenched a unique and often racialized class structure in the service jobs, in which workers must please both customer and employer to earn anything at all. A journalist wrote in 1902 that he was embarrassed to offer a tip to a white man. There's, an egregious use of the N-word here. Takes tips, of course, one expects that of them, of Black men ostensibly. It is a token of their inferiority, he wrote. Oof. Tips go with servility, and no man who is a voter in this country, a white landowner, is in the least justified in being in service. Oof. Yes, so this was definitely something that was codified as being something white people gave to Black people. Tipping and the aristocratic idea it exemplified is what we left Europe to escape. It is a cancer on the breast of democracy, William Scott wrote in his 1916 anti-tipping screed, The Itching Palm. Scott went on to write, the relation of a man giving a tip and a man accepting it is as undemocratic as the relation of master and slave. A citizen in a republic ought to stand shoulder to shoulder with every other citizen, with no thought of cringing, without an assumption of superiority or an acknowledgement of inferiority. Another author described the working class as now fawning for favors because of the introduction of the tipping practice. And by 1904, an anti-tipping society of America had emerged with 100,000 members who pledged not to tip anyone for a year. And it was a move backed by most labor unions at the time. In 1909, Washington State passed the first anti-tipping law, and 5 states soon followed after that. However, these new laws weren't enforced very well, and courts had a hard time knowing what to do with them. So by 1926, no anti-tipping laws were left in legislation anywhere in the United States. As tipping grew to be more and more customary, even those who ideologically opposed tipping found themselves in a position where they felt forced to tip, so as not to turn their back on the working class who had now come to rely more and more on the tips of customers as their employers scaled back their wages. Samuel Gompers, who was president of the American Federation of Labor and a leading figure of the anti-tipping movement, admitted that he himself followed the usual custom of giving tips. The New Deal-era Fair Labor and Standards Act of 1938 legally introduced the country's first federal minimum wage of 25 cents per hour. The original legislation, however, excluded hotel, restaurant, and other service workers. So just as the anti-tipping movement was fighting its last breaths here in the U.S., it was actually picking up steam in Europe, where it had originated. In 1943, the Catering Wages Act in Britain established a minimum wage for service employees to help reduce their reliance on tipping. And in 1955, France passed a law requiring restaurants to add a service charge to each bill, which explains why that service charge is now so customary in so many countries outside of the U.S. When the U.S. attempted to follow suit in 1966 and include an amendment to the Fair Labor and Standards Act, including service workers, a new amendment was swiftly introduced afterwards, including a sub-minimum wage, which allowed employers to pay tipped workers a base wage below the federal minimum wage, so long as the tips and wages added up to the minimum wage. So that federal tipped minimum wage has stagnated at $2.13 an hour since 1991.
What the fuck?
And
of course, but also...
Right. And inflation has steadily eroded its purchasing power. Today, the American restaurant industry is one of the largest and fastest growing sectors of the economy, with nearly 10% of the workforce, all of the working Americans, working in the restaurant industry. It's also the lowest paying industry, with highest proportion of workers earning at or below the federal minimum wage. As Saru Jeremiah explains, it's unconscionable. It's literally a slave wage. I do think it's important to recognize that this is a 70% female workforce. And so I do think, in thinking about how a wage has stayed at $2.13, when you're looking at an industry that's majority female, you understand that basically the nation has valued women at a $2 wage. In addition to being disproportionately women, the labor force of servers is also disproportionately black and brown, as reported by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, compounding the issue of income inequality along racial and gender lines. While theoretically tips are supposed to add up to equal a fair minimum wage, violations are rampant and often difficult to quantify. From 2010 to 2012, the U.S. Department of Labor found that of over 9,000 investigated restaurants, 84% violated wage and hour laws. The same report also found 1,200 tip credit violations. In 2014, 1 in 6 restaurant workers lived below the poverty line, which is 10 percentage points higher than the average in other industries. Essentially, what the restaurant industry has argued, therefore, for the last 150 years is, we shouldn't have to pay our workers. You, the customers, should pay our workers' wages for us, which is not how it's done anywhere else in the world and not what tipping was intended to be, says Gemma Ryan. The result is a labor force of servers facing mixed realities. Some are able to secure high-tipping restaurant jobs in states where they earn the full minimum wage, but others, especially those living in states with that $2.13 per hour sub-minimum wage law, they're often struggling to survive despite working full-time. Data from 538 shows that, on average, workers in casual dining restaurants have to work 9 times harder than their counterparts in fine dining just to reach the standard minimum wage. One server in Indiana with 2 kids reported that her family had just $400 in savings, and she has to rely on garage sales to make ends meet. I have a quote from her here. Nowadays, it's like you have to have 4 incomes in one household to just be comfortably living, she said. Like having cars that run, not having to go to food banks, not having to wake up early in the morning so you can go sit in a food bank for 3 hours to get enough food to last you a week. It's pretty sad. In order to earn enough tips to make ends meet, servers often feel forced to perform for the unregulated expectations of their customers, who aren't liable to the same oversight that an employer would be. Where it would be illegal for an employer to remark upon the physical appearance of a server, there are no laws regulating what a customer can say to a server. And many servers report enduring sexual harassment from customers regularly, worried that if they spoke up, they might lose their job or lose the customer for good. One server reported a customer patting his lap and asking the server to have a seat because he's a great tipper. Another server reported a group of men offering her $30 if she'd answer a question about her pubic hair. Another report frequently having tips withheld unless she gave male customers her phone number. She developed a trick where she writes it down and just changes one digit. Another server reported having to field a number of personal invasive questions, including about where she lived and went to school. And many servers say that customers harassing them outside of work is a worry and fear all on its own, with some men intentionally staying until closing to wait until their favorite server is ready to leave. They wait for them in the parking lots or approach them when they take out the trash. One server reported regularly having her thigh grabbed by a male customer who she felt hesitant to report to her manager because he always left a $20 tip. One server reported standing at a table when a man walked by, shoved his hand down her sweater, and grabbed her breast. After the assault, she felt something in her bra, and when she reached in to figure out what it was a dollar bill.
Ugh.
Servers also report being photographed by men dining at their tables as they bend over to put food on the table, with men attempting to photograph their cleavage, then posting the photos to Snapchat. Another reported a customer reaching under her skirt and grabbing her crotch while she was working. She recalls wanting to scream but thinking, I don't want to do anything that makes these people leave and not tip me. Instead, she reported the customer to her manager, and when she looked over a few minutes later, she saw her manager shaking the customer's hand. When asked if she thought tips would improve customers' behavior towards servers, she responded, I think so, because they don't have control. It can't be, well, I can give you $10 or I can give you $100, depending on what you'll do for me. In fact, more than 60% of servers report having been harassed, propositioned, or even groped by customers. And women working in restaurants in states with lower minimum wages for tipped employees are twice as likely to report experiencing sexual harassment than those working in states that have one minimum wage for all workers. I have another quote here. When I first started, I used to get so creeped out and weirded out all the time, said a server in Charleston, West Virginia, who felt pressured into the job as she struggled to find affordable housing. If you want to make money, you'll learn to laugh. These egregious offenses are built into the history of serving. Trade magazines in the 1980s and 1990s advised women to increase tips by opening blouse buttons and placing a hand on the shoulder of male customers. And while women bear the brunt of these advances, men are not exempt from it either. One server, a man working in New York City, explained, I can only imagine it's worse for women, but it happens to me on a weekly basis. The other night, some gentlemen drank a little bit too much, and they were saying things about me, like that I'm delicious. You have women leaving their numbers or playing coy. Women who hit on me do it in a way that's more acceptable. They don't cross certain lines, whereas the men are much more blunt, forward, and obvious. As so many servers rely on tips, it also creates a dynamic of bias and pay for servers on the whole. In a 2009 study, Professor Michael Lynn of Cornell found that customers are more likely to tip waitresses who are large-breasted, slender, and blonde. Shocking.
So Barbie.
White servers are also tipped more than people of color, according to his research. One black server reported having an inside deal with a white older coworker who offered to take, quote, the redneck tables to spare her the indignity of being subjected to racist slights and stiffed on tips. Another server, a black woman from Big Lake, Minnesota, says, on top of the sexual inappropriateness, race is brought up. So I've heard, I've never been with a black girl, and you're hot for a black chick, and ooh, hot chocolate is working tonight. It's really hard to come back with a witty quip when I feel angry and violated. She has to be sure to look pretty enough for her shifts that men will tip her, but that means dealing with constant harassment. Some nights she endures it for as little as $50 in tips. She gets a base wage of $9.65 per hour because she's in Minnesota, but for an 8-hour shift, that plus $50 in tips leaves her with just $127.20 before taxes, and it's not enough to take care of herself and her 9-year-old daughter. A significant portion of my income is how men feel about me that day, she says. On the whole, according to the New York Times, Black women who are tipped restaurant workers earn on average nearly $5 an hour less than their white male counterparts nationwide, largely because they are segregated into more casual restaurants in which they earn far less in tips than white men who more often work in fine dining, but also because of customer bias in tipping. According to the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, tipped workers of color continue to suffer the consequences of this legacy. In the restaurant industry alone, over 27% of Black workers live in poverty. About 37% of tipped workers are mothers, and nearly half of these women are single moms. For a single mother, earning the tipped minimum wage often means going without breaks at work, going without insurance because her employer is not obligated to provide it, going without enough nutritious food to keep her and her family fed and healthy. So we've got this fucked up legacy, but as it currently stands, 80% of Americans say they would rather tip than pay a flat service charge at a restaurant, like lots of other countries have. Although there aren't numbers to back it up, it's pretty much taken as a fact that upping the price for meals themselves to accommodate higher pay for servers would turn customers away from the restaurant altogether. Most customers look at the price per dish and they'll balk at an increase, but they won't bat their eye as much at a service charge and certainly not as much at a tip. However, tipping still seems preferable in the customer's mind to a service charge because customers assume that it provides a higher quality of service, bringing back the days of yore in which the workers had to grovel for pittance at the feet of the aristocracy. If there's one thing I've learned, though, in my 21 years of work experience, it's this. Customers usually don't actually know what they want. And it makes sense if you think about it. We're all customers somewhere at some place. And when we act as customers, we lack the specialized knowledge necessary to truly make informed decisions most of the time. We can't all be experts on restaurants just because we go out to eat. We can only make decisions with the information we have. And most of the time, the information we have is personal, anecdotal, and logical, but we lack the specialized knowledge to guess what might happen if things were different. There's an unknown factor there that the average person can't properly speculate on as a consumer in hundreds or thousands of industries across their lifetime without the proper education and training that people working in those businesses have. And at our work, I see this all the time. A common request our customers have for us, it's not food service, right? It's e-commerce. But they'll often ask us to remove sold out products from our company's website. However, when we did this, our sales dropped dramatically. By removing sold products from our website, our customers were only able to see the least popular items at any given time, and it made our inventory offerings appear limited and less desirable on the whole. Additionally, it removed the social proof that made shopping with our company seem trustworthy. We added the sold out items back in and sales rebounded instantly. To this day, customers tell us all the time that they want to remove the sold out items from our website, and I have to stop myself from telling them, you actually don't. You don't want us to do that. To put it succinctly, we as customers don't know what we don't know, and sometimes our best guesses about what we would actually like are wrong. And that's okay, because we can't be experts on absolutely everything. So even though customers currently say they'd rather pay a tip than a service charge and would rather pay a service charge than just pay higher prices for food items, the reality is we don't know how upset customers would be with this shift unless we just went ahead and did it as an entire culture. While customers may think they like tipping because it gives them a sense of control over the quality of their dining experience, in reality, according to Cornell professor Michael Lynn, tipping only provides a correlation to better service at a rate of just 2%. Diners generally tip the same percentage no matter what the quality of service and no matter what the setting. It's something more based on their personality, social expectations, and how they individually deal with being served. As psychologist Ernest Deichter told a magazine reporter in 1960, it's embarrassing to have another person wait on you. The need to pay psychologically for the guilt involved in the unequal relationship is so strong that very few are able to ignore it. In fact, tipping is so ingrained to psychology that when dining in larger groups of people, individuals are comfortable tipping less because they feel the psychological burden on them to account for the embarrassment of being served is reduced and spread out amongst more people. Ever wonder why restaurants are more likely to include that service charge for larger tables, even though they might not usually? It's because the tip size is inversely proportional to the number of diners. One 1973 study at an Ohio restaurant revealed that individual diners tipped 19% on average, while groups of 6 left just 13.5%. While some individual restaurants are making the shift to a service charge more akin to what we see in other countries, this practice is still not normalized enough for customers to see if they actually care about the change at all here in the United States. Instead, the mere presence of something different is enough to send folks into a tizzy, sending them to Yelp, where they vent their frustrations about this new, different way of doing things. Restaurants that eliminate tipping are regularly subjected to a litany of bad reviews on Yelp. And the second they reverse the practice and reinstate tipping, the reviews recover swiftly. The public review system makes it difficult for any individual restaurant to make the change permanently, let alone instate a cultural shift away from the practice entirely. Federal legislation needs to step in and take over, leveling the minimum wage across all industries, eliminating the sub-minimum wage of $2.13 per hour, and also raising the current minimum wage beyond the currently unlivable low pay of $7.25. The median necessary living wage across the entire U.S. is $67,690 per year, or $32.50 per hour. And it's time to catch up.
Yeah.
So what do you think about all this?
Wow. Now I'm like, I think I knew there was a better way than tipping, but now I'm like, okay, this system is really fucked.
It's evil.
Like, I think that if everyone just had a good standard of living. Like, it seems like it really is like, oh, it's just like this, it's like a bougie thing to do.
Right.
It started out as like a bougie thing, and then of course people are like, hey, how do we use this to our advantage? And I'm like, oh yeah, no surprise. And of course in America is like, oh yes, legacy of racism,
right,
like involved. And I think that it's the thing where it's like people are annoyed by tipping, but they can't see like an alternative when when it's like, well, I mean, if you wanted to go like the easy route, like I feel like just being like, everyone, if you're going to have a minimum wage, everyone makes a minimum wage regardless of vocation. And in the service industry, it's just, you're like, well, we have a 10 to 20% service charge. Right. Which is in replacement of tips.
Yeah, because you could do that, because you could say, here's the price for your food and here's the price for your service. They're both itemized, and you know, it's on the receipt. That's what you're paying for. I do think it's interesting though, because I'm like, nobody applied like the Marxist critique of this, where I'm like, how much are the restaurant owners making?
Actually, I was just thinking about this. I'm like, wow, like if you're a restaurateur, you make bank because you have to pay your servers less.
Right. I know it's like more difficult to start a restaurant because the startup costs are higher than other industries. But at the same time, if you're an established restaurant, yeah, I mean, I know like restaurant chefs, they're usually pretty broke because it's like a passion project of their own. But yeah, you see these like multi-million-dollar restaurateurs, and yeah, they're not even paying a base living wage to their servers.
Wow. Okay, this is like really eye-opening to me. It's so funny because the first time I had ever heard of like a service charge was many, many years ago when I went to Portland. I went to like gosh, I can't remember exactly what the restaurant was, but it was like kind of fancy and it was really good. And they're like, we want, you know, they're like, we add a 20% service charge to each bill, like you would if you were at a table of like 6 or more, but for every meal. And this, you don't need to tip. We just do this to ensure that our servers have like a good wage of, you know, like a decent living and pay for health insurance and blah, blah, blah. And I was like I was so shocked. I'd never seen anything like that before. And I was like, oh, that's such a great idea. And it being like kind of a bougie restaurant, I still tipped on top of it. Like even on top of the service charge. And I'm like, damn, if you just had a service charge, even if you were like, you know, restaurant baby bossing, like adding the service charge, like would still be like, well, you're still not having to pay your employees full amount, and they still get and people will probably still tip on top of the 20%, even though they wouldn't have to. Yeah, because just we're so conditioned for it to be rude not to tip. Like it's like, that is a very cultural thing where it's like, even if you're like, you don't need, like, to me, like, they're like, you don't need to tip because like it's built in. It would probably take me a very long time to unlearn that, because to me, it seems very rude, but that's just culturally.
It is. It's a cultural thing, and it's a cultural shift I think like we all need to make. But it's like, yeah, first of all, everybody, this sub minimum wage thing
that's bad,
horrific,
horrifying. I'm like throwing up my hands. No,
we don't want that. That needs to get, you know, it's like in all the steps. You're like, first, get rid of that thing. Everybody does the federal minimum wage. Second, federal minimum wage way higher. Let's get it up to that $32.54 an hour, so everybody can have a livable wage across the United States.
Like if we're going to do this is the capitalism system we have now.
Right. If we're capitalisming, here's the Band-Aid steps, you know? It's like 1, no sub minimum. 2, minimum way higher, you know? And then 3, it's like, if you want to add the service charge because you think people will not enjoy seeing the price of a hamburger go up, but they don't mind the service charge, that's fine. However you want to do it. However you want to itemize it, put it on the receipt, and it's fine. And then this one restaurant, actually, when I was reading about this in New York, they added the service charge. And then they also said that when customers would ask if they could tip on top of it, because they had a stamp on their receipts where they're like, no tipping, we do not accept tips. When customers would be like, well, I want to tip, the owner said he would come out and say, oh, well, in lieu of tipping, since we pay all of our workers a living wage just already with their salaries, you can donate what you would want to tip to this charity that we support instead. And he said nobody ever donates to the charity. So
that's funny, because I was like, I would do that.
I would too. I think I would too. I'm like, that's cool. But yeah, so it's like there's these steps that need to be taken. But I think that I was really shocked to learn just how like blatantly and egregious the racism is. I mean, I don't know why it still shocks me. It's like everything is just so racist all the time. But yeah, it's pretty wild, especially taking into consideration the current gendered and racial like makeup of servers.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the servers' stories, it just really hit me, because you know how like people are like, when things when you're talking about like Yelp reviews and people like leaving bad reviews because of the service charge and the tipping, and like I was just thinking like, oh, it's so wild to me how people act when there's a change in service industry or retail.
Yeah.
Like the general like face like facing the public. I don't know what you would call that, but like you hear all these nightmare stories with people who are servers during COVID, being like people like throwing drinks at them, like screaming at them. I mean, even retail workers being shot for asking people to put on masks and stuff. Like, I don't like, I think the culture of tipping breeds into the culture of treating retail workers and service workers like servants in a feudal society.
Well, another thing I read when I was looking into this is how this intersects with the idea that the customer's always right. Mm-hmm. And people think they can get away with whatever they want because they're like, the customer's always right. So anything I want, you have to do for me. And we don't kind of have a culture where we protect workers. And, the customer's not always right. You don't get to do whatever you want to do to these people because they're here standing in front of you.
You are not a lord or baron or whatever, or queen or whatever the fuck. Like, I think that even, like, it's so funny. Like, I feel like sometimes I'm not, even if you are, like, a conservative American, it's like, well, if you are like America for, it's like, well, then you're also against aristocracy, but maybe you aren't. I personally think that, like, deep down conservatives want an aristocracy, but that's just my,
no, I think like, they do.
That's my conspiracy theory.
They all want to be the little kings of their castle.
Yeah, but to me, it's like, but if you are about like freedom and like equality and like whatever, like quote unquote American, I'm air quote American bullshit, then like, yeah, like there are no like, lords and ladies or aristocracy, whatever.
It's not master and servant.
No, it's not. Like, we're all like kind of like, we're all supposed to be like on equal footing. And like, to me, it's like someone at a restaurant or store is just there helping you out. In fact, you are a guest in their domain. Like, in my view, as a person who's worked retail for many years.
Another thing that this made me think about is I went to the South once as a teenager, a couple times actually. And one of the things that struck me was the idea of Southern hospitality. Oh, yeah.
I a summer spent like a month in Charleston.
Yeah, and I remember being really uncomfortable with Southern hospitality because it is so heavily focused on service. And any bathroom I went into, there was a bathroom attendant, and I wasn't used to that. And I didn't know what to do, and I didn't carry cash. So I was like, I can't tip you. What am I do? I don't need anything. I don't require any of this. And just this idea of service. And when you look at this history and you think about this, you're like, oh, well, the South is where all of these service industries kind of grew after, the Civil War, right? Because all of these people were basically re-enslaved into these really low pay jobs where the customer tipped them. And
it's really striking. Like,
it is.
Because we are like, well, I'm from the West and you're from West Coast.
Yeah.
So it's very striking and very, like, it was strange to me. Like,
Which
the Southern
obviously,
hospitality.
right, isn't to say we don't have our own, like,
No,
fucked up
for
racism
sure.
in service industry here. But it just, because I wasn't used to it, it was really striking to me. It's like, whoa, I'm really uncomfortable. And I remember, like, going to a hotel and somebody carrying my bag, and I'm being like, I can carry my own bag. Like, you don't have to carry my bag. It's okay. But then on the other hand, they're like, this is my job. Like, I have to carry your bag and you have to tip me. Otherwise, I don't have a job.
Yeah.
And then it's like, how do you break that dynamic that's so entrenched in our culture? And that's why I think the thing about individual businesses, you know, when people are so used to something, they really hate change, right?
Yeah.
They really don't like the change. So it, like, almost might have to be a top-down thing for some of these people, especially older people who are more accustomed to service culture and really feel like they can get away with treating people in the service industry like garbage, right? It's
it
like,
really is ingrained in, like, American society. Like, it's so fucking wild, like, how badly people treat, like, service people.
Service workers, yeah. And it's, you know, I get it. I get it, like, as a customer, like, most Americans are very underpaid. And when you are a customer anywhere, your money, it was hard earned most of the time. Mm-hmm. Wages are down. Life is more difficult every year. You worked hard for that money. And if you're giving it over to somebody, you want that to be the best possible quality experience you can have. But at the same time, it's like there's another person on the other end of that, of any customer service transaction, of any kind of service transaction.
Yeah, and I think in our society, money equals respect. So if you are paying someone money, you demand respect. And if you feel that respect has been violated, whether true or not, like, people get angry, and they get angry on this level where it's, you're not just being, like, annoying. You're violating the the unspoken agreement of America, which is that money equals respect.
Right. And it's hard too, though, because everybody has a different idea of what respect is, right? So it's like, if you go into a restaurant and your idea of respect is that the pretty girl flirts with you, and if she's not, that's disrespectful. Well, that's not her idea of respect. She wouldn't go into a restaurant and expect the server to flirt with her. So you can't, there's no way to quantify the value of respect. You know, so that shouldn't be something that's on the bill.
Yeah, but it's just like, those situations aren't meant for a two-way interaction, like the way that it's set up, because, or just like in society in general, people don't, it's like a lot of, like, the sphere of economics isn't about, like, oh my gosh, what is this other person doing, or what if there was a different way? It's not, like, speculative or like empathetic.
Right. And
it's transactional.
It's transactional, and it's also, like, based on legacy so much, like we talked about. You know, you can't, it's so hard to change things once they've been institutionalized.
Yeah.
And it's pretty wild. And nobody, you know, when you hear people who are like, I don't tip, you know, you think they're assholes. They're assholes.
My gosh. Oh, yeah. Like, I was at a family gathering and someone's like, well, I don't tip if, like, the service isn't, like, up. And I was, like, so shocked. Sometimes, like, I was like, what, I wanted to, like, literally walk out the door, but it was like, you know, family, it was like Thanksgiving or something, where it was just like, I'm gonna shut my mouth on this one so I don't, like, burn down the house. But I was like, I was like visibly just like,
well, one time I worked as a personal assistant, and I remember she thought that 10% was a standard tip and 15% would be for stellar service. So anywhere we went, she tipped 10% on meals. And I told her, I was like, that's not standard anymore, right? Because maybe it was standard in the 70s or something like that, but it's changed. As worker wages have stagnated, you know, in order to even make it up to something resembling something someone can live off of, 20% is the norm here in the United States now. And I would actually run back into restaurants after she left. I would make up excuses and be like, oh, I left my sunglasses. And I would go change her tip on her receipts. She never noticed. You know, but I was just like, no, fuck that. Like, I told you that's not acceptable. So it's hard because on one hand, the people who are like, I don't tip, you know, they're assholes. You don't want to be that person. But then, like, the big brain version is we all shouldn't tip and people should just be able to earn money to live for doing their job.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even beyond that, we're like, you know, if you're just like, wages, money and wages shouldn't...
That's the bigger brain. No money, no wages, biggest brain.
The thing is, it's just like, it's so much better for everybody to either have a living wage for everybody, and it would actually serve everybody better, regardless. And because remembering doing the math is, I feel like actually for a lot of people, doing the math is the most stressful thing.
Yeah, my boyfriend, whenever we go out to a restaurant, he'll just hand it over to me so I can do the math for him because he doesn't like math and it stresses him out. And he's like, I don't know. And I'll do it for him, yeah.
And it's just like, a gentle approach would be like, you raise the minimum wage, you institute a mandatory service fee that is for places in, that, and then you can say you can tip on top of that or not.
Right. And
because that would be like an easy way for people like even me
to make the transition.
Because I'm just like, I'm just so used to it. Like, I don't want to be rude. And because probably people are still expecting it.
Right. A little bit. Yeah.
Where it's like, and along with that, providing just more worker protections
on the whole,
like, especially the thing with working retail and commission. I think that commission should also be abolished.
Yeah. And I think that, it really
it's the same thing as tipping.
Right. And it like incentivizes people, especially women, to perform for the male gaze.
Well, I think for like luxury brands that do commissions, it should be a service fee for the person who provided. It should be a percentage of the sale goes directly to the person who did the sale or to the entire working staff, because that's like especially like in places like retail, it's like people can compete for commission when like sometimes the person who rings it up wasn't the person doing all the legwork.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that too from working retail. This also reminds me, when I lived in San Francisco, we introduced this new citywide measure. It was called Healthy SF, and it was citywide health insurance, and restaurants added, I think it was like a 3.5% charge to every single bill, and it would say Healthy SF on the receipt so that restaurant workers had city health insurance. I just remembered that. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if we're capitalisming, we should add on a service fee to all retail. And, if we're not going to have that higher minimum wage, there needs to be a service fee on all the transactions that are like,
and if
that are like luxury transactions that are like, not luxury, but
it's called luxury spending, actually, even if it's not like what you think of as luxury.
That's what
I
was thinking.
Non-essential
it's not like, it's just like
transaction.
if you're like not at the grocery store buying like food and items, which I guess you could extend that to like clothing too, but not
clothing is considered a non-essential luxury purchase. All clothing is considered a luxury purchase unless it's like work clothes or baby clothes.
So it's totally. Like, I don't know, that might also be like, if people aren't ready for the big change, we need to do stuff for people to be eventually ready for the galaxy brain moment,
right,
where we all live in moneyless harmony.
And in the meantime, we should just keep telling people that things like tipping, it's really racist. It's not good. And I think like the more you talk to people and the more you explain things to them, like I probably would not have looked into this if our Patreon listener hadn't recommended it as an episode. And when I did, I was like, holy, this is fucked. And I think that's cool that our listener recommended that to us. This might be a good chance to plug our Patreon. We've started adding weekly bonus content to our Patreon. So if you are interested in subscribing, it is $2 a month, and you can leave us messages, and you can do what this lovely person Holly did, where they left us a show recommendation as well. And that was super cool to be able to go on our Patreon and be like, oh, what a great idea for an episode. I'm going to look into this.
Yeah.
So, anything else to add on our episode about tipping?
No more tipping, but please tip at least 20%.
Tip 20% until we abolish it as a practice completely.
Yes.
Yes, I think that sounds right. Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
Something.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Pick Me Up, I'm Scared. If you would like to find us on Patreon, it is patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. Again, it is $2 a month to support us, but also you don't have to support us with your money. You can support us with your ears. We're just happy you're here.
Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.